The glass slipped from my father's hand. It hit the wooden table, bounced once, and shattered across the Father's Day barbecue. Nobody moved. Not my brother. Not my aunt. Not my father's friends. Not even my father. They were all staring at the same thing, the envelope. The plain white envelope I had placed beside my father's plate less than 30 seconds earlier. And then my father looked at me. For the first time in my entire life, I saw something in his eyes I had never seen before. Fear. But that wasn't how the afternoon had started. It had started with laughter. 43 people were gathered in my father's backyard that Sunday afternoon. Family, neighbors, old friends, cousins I hadn't seen in years, and people I barely knew. There were balloons tied to the fence. A giant Father's Day banner hanging above the patio. 3 tables covered with red and white checkered cloth. My aunt had brought her famous potato salad. Someone was grilling steaks. Children were running through the grass with water guns. And my father was standing at the center of it all like a king celebrating his kingdom. His name was Richard Hale. He was 67 years old. A retired construction company owner. A man who had spent his entire life believing that respect was something you demanded rather than something you earned. And to everyone standing in that backyard, he was a great father. The kind of father people praised. The kind of father neighbors admired. The kind of father who shook hands firmly, laughed loudly, paid for everyone's dinner, and told stories about how hard he'd worked to give his children a better life. There was only one problem. I was his daughter, and he had spent the last 15 years making sure I understood that I was the child he regretted having. My name is Emily Hale. I was 36 years old, and that afternoon, I was standing at the edge of my father's patio, holding a small envelope that contained the one thing he had spent years trying to hide. But nobody knew that yet, not even my brother, especially not my brother. My younger brother Daniel was sitting beside my father. Daniel was 32. He wore an expensive watch, a tailored shirt, and the kind of confident smile that came naturally to people who had never been forced to question whether they belonged. My father had always adored him. Daniel could do no wrong. If Daniel changed jobs 3 times in 1 year, Dad called it ambition. If I changed jobs once, Dad called me unstable. If Daniel bought a new car, Dad said he deserved it. If I bought a new car, Dad asked why I couldn't save money. If Daniel forgot Father's Day, Dad said he was busy building his future. If I forgot to call one evening, Dad told everyone I was selfish. That was the system in our family. Daniel was the son who could do anything. I was the daughter who could never do enough. And that afternoon, my father was about to make sure everyone knew it. I had been standing near the drinks table when my Aunt Margaret tapped her glass. "Richard," she called. "You have to say something." Everyone laughed. My father smiled. He loved moments like that. He slowly stood. Daniel immediately moved his chair back. Someone handed my father a fresh glass of lemonade. He lifted it. The conversations faded. My father looked around the yard. "My family," he began. People smiled. He talked about hard work. He talked about sacrifice. He talked about how proud he was that his children had grown up. Then he put his hand on Daniel's shoulder. "Daniel has always understood what family means." Daniel smiled. My father continued. "He stayed close. He helped when I needed him. He built something for himself without forgetting where he came from." Everyone applauded. I didn't. I simply stood there. Then my father looked directly at me. The smile disappeared. And then he said, "There are people who only remember their family when they need something." The backyard became strangely quiet. I knew immediately. He was talking about me. My cousin looked down. My Aunt Margaret suddenly became fascinated by her plate. Daniel lowered his eyes, pretending he didn't know where this was going. But he knew. Everyone knew. My father raised his glass again. Some children grow up thinking they're too good for the family that raised them. A few uncomfortable chuckles came from the table. My father looked directly at me. "Emily has always been that way." There it was. My name. Not daughter. Not sweetheart. Not kid. Emily. Like I was an employee being reprimanded. Someone behind me whispered something. I couldn't hear the words. But I heard the laughter that followed. My father smiled. "You know what I've learned?" He paused. "Money doesn't make a person successful." He looked at Daniel. "It reveals who they really are." Then he looked at me. "And sometimes it reveals that they're nothing like the family they came from." That hurt. Not because it was new. Because it wasn't. I'd heard variations of those words my entire adult life. But this time there were 43 witnesses. And something inside me finally went quiet. I didn't feel embarrassed. I didn't feel angry. I didn't even feel like crying. I simply looked at my father and realized something. This was the last time he would ever get the chance to humiliate me. My Aunt Margaret finally spoke. "Richard, maybe that's enough." My father waved her off. "No, she should hear this." Daniel leaned toward him. My father ignored him. "I gave this girl everything." My jaw tightened. Everything? That word had always been his favorite. Everything. He had given me everything. Except kindness. Except approval. Except the simple feeling that I belonged. "I paid for her education," he continued. That wasn't true. He had helped with one semester. I had worked 2 jobs to pay for the rest. But I didn't correct him. I gave her a place to live when she was young. True, I had been 16. It was called my childhood home. But I didn't correct him. I gave her opportunities. I almost laughed. The opportunities he gave Daniel had names attached to them. Business loans, introductions, connections, investments. The opportunities he gave me were lectures. Then my father said the sentence that finally ended everything. "But she was always ashamed of us." The backyard went silent. I looked at him. "Is that what you believe?" He shrugged. "It's what everyone knows." I looked around. Nobody met my eyes. That was the answer. My father smiled. Then he raised his glass. "So here's to Daniel." Everyone lifted their glasses. "And here's to the child who stayed." The glasses clinked. I stood alone. Then my father added, "And here's to Emily." The yard became quiet again. He smiled. "Maybe someday she'll learn that being part of a family is more important than pretending she's better than everyone." A few people laughed. And that's when I smiled. Not because I was happy. Because I suddenly understood. My father thought this was his victory. He had no idea the envelope in my purse contained the end of his story. I reached inside my bag. My fingers touched the paper. I had carried that envelope for 3 weeks. I had rewritten the note inside it 6 times. I had almost thrown it away twice. But now I knew. There would never be another Father's Day. At least not like this. I walked toward the table. My father watched me. For a second, he probably thought I was going to apologize. That was what he expected from me. I would cry. I would explain. I would ask for forgiveness. I would tell him I loved him. I would somehow prove that I deserved a place at his table. Instead, I placed the envelope beside his plate. His smile disappeared. "What is this?" I looked at him. "Happy Father's Day, Dad." That's all I said. Then I turned around and walked away. Behind me, I heard Daniel laugh nervously. "She's being dramatic." My father picked up the envelope. He turned it over. There was no return address, no explanation, just his name, Richard Hale. And beneath it, 4 words, "You should have known." He stopped breathing. At least that's what it looked like from where I was standing. I kept walking. I crossed the patio, past the grill, walked through the side gate, and headed toward my car. Nobody followed me, not even once. But as I reached the driveway, I heard my father's voice. "Emily!" I stopped. I didn't turn around. "Come back here." His voice sounded different, not angry, confused. I slowly looked over my shoulder. He was standing beside the table. The envelope was still in his hand. "What's inside this?" I smiled faintly. "The truth." Then I got into my car. I closed the door and drove away. But to understand why I had carried that envelope to my father's Father's Day party, you have to understand what happened 15 years earlier. Because that's when my father stopped seeing me as his daughter and started seeing me as his disappointment. I was 21 when I first realized my father would never love me the way he loved Daniel. It happened on a Tuesday. Nothing dramatic, no screaming, no argument, just a conversation at the kitchen table. Daniel had just been accepted into a business program. My father was ecstatic. He opened a bottle of expensive wine. He called relatives. He told everyone, "My son is going to be somebody." I remember sitting across the table. I was studying accounting at the time. I had just received the highest grade in my class. I waited for him to ask about it. He never did. Instead, he turned toward Daniel. "I'm going to help you start your first company after graduation." Daniel laughed. "Seriously?" "Of course." Then Dad looked at me. "And what are you planning to do?" "Become a financial analyst." He nodded. That's nice. That's nice." 2 words. That was my celebration. Daniel got a future. I got that's nice. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself I didn't need his approval. And for a while I believed myself. Until graduation. I graduated near the top of my class. I had a job offer waiting. I was proud. My mother was proud. She cried when she saw me in my graduation gown. My father shook my hand. "Good job." Then Daniel arrived late. He hadn't graduated yet. He hadn't even finished his first year. But my father hugged him. That was the moment I understood. In our family, achievement didn't determine your value. Your place did. Daniel was the son. I was the daughter. And that was enough to decide everything. Years passed. I built my career, I rented a small apartment, I saved money, I paid my own bills, I bought my first house at 30, my father never visited, not once. Daniel, meanwhile, moved back home after losing money on a business venture. Dad welcomed him. He needs some time. Then Daniel lost more money. Dad helped him again. Then again. I never asked my father for money. Not because I didn't need help. Because I knew what asking would cost. Every dollar came with a reminder. Every favor became evidence. Every mistake became proof that he had been right about me. So I built my life quietly. And eventually, I stopped expecting anything from him. Until my mother became sick. That changed everything. My mother, Susan, was the only person in our family who understood what was happening. She knew my father favored Daniel. She knew how he spoke about me when I wasn't there. She knew I had spent years trying to earn affection that should never have required earning. And during the final months of her illness, she started telling me things she had kept secret. One evening, while we were sitting together in her bedroom, she reached for my hand. "Emily." "Yes, Mom, there is something your father doesn't know I know." I looked at her. She was tired. Very tired. "What?" She took a long breath. "Your father has been lying to everyone." I frowned. "About what?" She looked toward the hallway. Then lowered her voice. "About Daniel." My stomach tightened. "What about him?" Mom squeezed my hand. "He's not the successful son your father thinks he is." I didn't understand. "What do you mean?" She looked me directly in the eyes. "He's been hiding something." "What?" Before she could answer, the bedroom door opened. My father walked in. Mom immediately stopped talking. He smiled. "Everything okay?" She nodded. "Of course." I knew then that whatever she was about to tell me was dangerous. But I didn't know how dangerous. 3 weeks later, my mother died. And my father changed. He became harder, colder, more obsessed with Daniel, and more determined to make sure I stayed outside the family business. I tried to respect his wishes. I really did. But 6 months after my mother's funeral, I received a package. There was no return address. Inside was a copy of a bank statement. And one handwritten sentence. "Your mother was right." I stared at those words for almost an hour. Then I started investigating. What I discovered over the next 14 months changed everything I believed about my family. And eventually, it led to the envelope sitting beside my father's plate on Father's Day. But I didn't know that when I first opened that package. At the time, all I knew was one thing. Someone wanted me to find the truth. And whoever that person was, they were terrified of my father finding out first. Because the secret they had uncovered wasn't about money. It was about something much worse. It was about who my father had actually been protecting all those years, and who he had been sacrificing instead. Me. The next morning I made one decision. I wouldn't confront my father. Not yet. I wouldn't confront Daniel. Not yet. I wouldn't tell anyone. Because if my mother had spent years keeping this secret, there had to be a reason. So I put the bank statement into a folder. I wrote one word on the front, Famel, and I locked it inside my desk. For the next 11 months, I collected everything. Bank records, business documents, property transfers, old emails, loan agreements, insurance records, anything connected to my father's company. And slowly, a pattern appeared. Daniel wasn't simply bad with money. He wasn't simply irresponsible. Someone had been covering his mistakes. Someone had been moving money. Someone had been hiding losses. And every time the numbers stopped making sense, my father blamed me. It was easier that way. The daughter who supposedly didn't care. The daughter who supposedly abandoned the family. The daughter who supposedly wanted nothing to do with them. I became the perfect scapegoat. Because nobody suspected the person standing outside the family was actually the one holding the pieces together. But then, 3 weeks before Father's Day, I found the document that changed everything. And that's when I bought the envelope. Because I finally knew what my father needed to see. Not what I wanted him to see, what he needed, the truth. And I knew exactly when I would give it to him. Father's Day, in front of everyone. Not because I wanted revenge. Because my father had spent 15 years telling everyone I was the problem. It was time for the truth to have witnesses. And when he finally opened that envelope, he was going to discover that the daughter he had humiliated in front of 43 people had been protecting him from the person he trusted most. His own son. The first thing I learned about secrets is that they rarely stay where people put them. They leak. Through bank statements. Through conversations people forget you can hear. Through signatures. Through old emails. Through the tiny inconsistencies that nobody notices because they already believe the story they're being told. My father had spent 15 years telling everyone the same story. Daniel was the responsible one. Daniel was the successful one. Daniel was the son who would carry the family name forward. And I was the daughter who had walked away, the selfish one, the difficult one, the one who cared more about money than family. But there was something my father didn't know. I had stopped trying to prove him wrong years ago. I had started keeping records instead. Not because I wanted revenge. Because numbers don't care who your father loves. Numbers don't care which child sits beside him at Thanksgiving. Numbers don't care who gets invited to the family business meeting. Numbers simply tell you what happened. And what happened inside my father's company was impossible to ignore. The company was called Hale Construction. My grandfather had started it with 2 trucks and a rented office. By the time I was born, it had become one of the largest independent construction companies in our county. My father took over when my grandfather died. He expanded it, built relationships, won government contracts, bought equipment, hired dozens of people. It was the thing my father was most proud of. And eventually, he decided Daniel would inherit it. That decision had been made before Daniel even graduated college. I knew because I overheard my father telling my mother, "He'll take over eventually." My mother had asked, "What about Emily?" My father laughed, "Emily doesn't want it." That wasn't true. But nobody had asked me. That's another lesson I learned about families. Sometimes people don't reject you because you failed. They reject you because they decided who you were before you had a chance to tell them. I had studied accounting. I understood business. I knew how to read contracts. I knew how to find irregularities in financial statements. And I had spent summers working in my father's office when I was younger. I knew Hale Construction almost as well as he did. But when Daniel showed interest, my father closed the door. "Business is a man's responsibility," he told me once. I remember looking at him. "Then why did you let me work in the office?" He smiled. "Because you're good with numbers." That was it. Good with numbers. Not good enough to lead, not good enough to inherit, not good enough to sit at the table. Just good enough to clean up the mess. I didn't argue. I left, and I built my own career. For years, I never looked back. Until my mother died. Then someone sent me that bank statement. I still remember the first night I studied it. It was almost midnight. My apartment was silent. I had a cup of tea beside me that had gone cold. The statement showed a transfer from Hale Construction to a company I'd never heard of. The amount was $106,000. I checked the date. 3 days after my mother entered hospice, my stomach tightened. I looked at the company name. D&H Development Group, D&H Daniel and Hale. At first, I thought it was a coincidence. Then I searched the registration. D&H Development Group had been established 8 months earlier. The listed owner was Daniel Hale. I leaned back in my chair. My brother had never mentioned owning a development company. Not once. I called him. He didn't answer. I didn't leave a message. Instead, I opened my laptop and started searching. Within 20 minutes I found something else. A second transfer, there 92,000, then another 14,000, then 75,000, 4 transfers. Different dates, same destination. D&H Development Group. I printed everything. The printer hummed through the silence. Page after page landed on my desk. I spread them out. The numbers didn't make sense. Hale Construction was transferring money to Daniel's private company. But why? And why was Daniel hiding it? I wanted to believe there was a reasonable explanation. Maybe my father had invested in his company. Maybe Daniel was starting a legitimate business. Maybe I was overreacting. So I did what I always did. I looked for the boring explanation first. I checked corporate filings. I checked property records. I checked public contracts. And that's when I found the first real problem. D&H Development didn't appear to be developing anything. There were no construction projects. No employees, no equipment, no active contracts, no visible business operations. It was essentially a shell. A company receiving money from Hale Construction and sending portions of it somewhere else. I followed the trail. It took me 3 weeks. 3 weeks of late nights. 3 weeks of spreadsheets. 3 weeks of telling myself I was only trying to understand what happened. Then I found the property. A piece of commercial land outside town, bought by D&H Development for $480,000. The purchase had been financed almost entirely through a loan. The collateral, a guarantee from Hale Construction, my father's company. I stared at the document. Daniel hadn't simply borrowed money. My father had put the family company behind him. If Daniel failed, Hale Construction would be responsible. I printed that document too. Then I noticed the date. The loan had been approved just 2 weeks after my mother died. I sat there for a long time. Something was wrong, very wrong. But I still didn't know how deep it went. I went to see my father, not to accuse him, just to ask. He was sitting in his office when I arrived, the same office I'd spent countless afternoons in as a teenager. Wooden desk, leather chair, photographs on the wall, Daniel everywhere, Daniel at graduation, Daniel with my father at a construction site, Daniel holding a trophy, Daniel standing beside a new truck. There was one photograph of me. A family picture from when I was 12. I was standing at the far edge. My father had his arm around Daniel. I looked at it for a moment. Then I turned away. Dad looked up. "What are you doing here?" I wanted to talk. "About Daniel." His face changed immediately. "What's he done?" The question surprised me. It was the first time my father had ever asked me that. Not "What did Emily do?" "What did Daniel do?" I sat down. He stared at me. "What transfers?" "From Hale Construction?" Silence. "To D&H Development." His expression hardened. "You've been going through company records." No, that was technically true. I had gone through public records. I found information. He leaned back. "Emily, stay out of Daniel's business." "Is it his business?" "What does that mean?" "It means your company guaranteed his loan." He stared at me. I watched the color drain slightly from his face. "Who told you that?" "No one." "Then you don't understand what you're looking at." "Maybe." I placed a folder on his desk. "Then explain it." He didn't open it. He pushed it back toward me. "I don't owe you an explanation." That sentence hurt more than I expected. I stood. "You're right." He looked at me. "I don't owe you one either." I picked up the folder. As I reached the door he said, "Emily?" I stopped. He didn't look at me. "Don't make trouble for your brother." I turned. "I haven't made any trouble." Then I added quietly, "Not yet." I walked out. That night I received another message. No name, no number I recognized. Just an email. There was one attachment. A photograph. It showed Daniel standing outside a bank. He was speaking to a man I recognized. My father's longtime attorney, Martin Cross. Under the photograph was one sentence. "Ask your father what happened to your mother's shares." I stared at the screen. My mother's shares. I had never thought about them. After she died, my father handled everything. He told me there was nothing complicated. "Your mother left everything to the family." I had accepted that, because grief makes you tired, and because I trusted my father. That was my mistake. The next morning, I went to the county records office. I requested the documents. The clerk pulled up the records. I read them once. Then again. Then a third time. My mother's ownership stake in Hale Construction had been transferred. Not to my father, not to me, not to the family. To Daniel. The transfer had occurred 2 months before my mother's death. I felt sick. I asked for a copy. The clerk printed it. I looked at the signature. My mother's name was there, but something about it didn't look right. The handwriting was shaky. The signature line was unusually small, and beneath it was a witness signature, Martin Cross, my father's attorney. I took the document home. Then I compared it to 3 other documents my mother had signed during the same period. Her medical authorization, her insurance paperwork, her will. The signatures were different, not dramatically, but enough. My mother had always signed her name with a long sweeping final stroke. The signature on the share transfer stopped abruptly. I couldn't prove anything, but I knew something was wrong. I called my mother's hospice nurse. Her name was Carol. She had been with Mom during the final 6 weeks. I hadn't spoken to her since the funeral. When she answered, I almost changed my mind. "Emily." Carol." There was a pause. "Is everything okay?" "I need to ask you something." "Of course." "Do you remember my mother signing documents near the end?" Carol went quiet. "I don't know." Another pause. Then she said, "Your father brought some papers." My heart started pounding. "When?" "Maybe 3 weeks before your mother died." "Was my mother awake most of the time? Did she sign them?" "I thought she did." "You thought?" Carol sighed. "Emily, your mother was heavily medicated." I closed my eyes. What happened? "Your father said they were business papers." "Was Daniel there?" Silence. "Carol, yes." My heart sank. "Daniel was there?" "For a few minutes." "What did they say?" "I don't remember." "Please." She hesitated. Then she said, "I remember your mother getting upset." "About what?" "I don't know." "Carol." "I remember her saying she didn't want to sign something." My hand tightened around the phone. "What happened after that?" "I left the room." "Why?" "Your father asked me to." I stared at the wall. "Did my mother sign?" "I don't know." Carol's voice became softer. "But later that evening, your mother asked me something strange." "What?" "She asked me if you had been told." "Told what?" "I don't know." "Anything else?" "She said your father would never understand." My throat tightened. "Did she say anything about Daniel?" Carol didn't answer. "Please?" Finally she said, "He'll take everything if Emily doesn't stop him." I couldn't breathe. Are you sure? I remember the words. Then she added something that stayed with me for years. Emily, your mother wasn't afraid of dying. She paused. She was afraid of what would happen after. That was the moment I stopped investigating casually. I hired an attorney. Not Martin Cross. Someone completely independent. Her name was Rachel Bennett. I gave her every document I had. She spent 2 weeks reviewing them. Then she called me. Emily, you need to come in. I went to her office the next morning. She closed the door. How much do you know about your mother's ownership interest? Not enough. Rachel nodded. That's the problem. She slid a folder toward me. Your mother owned 30% of Hale Construction. I knew that. What you didn't know, she continued, is that those shares were extremely valuable. How valuable? At least $7 million. I stared at her. $7 million. My father had told me my mother had left very little. Rachel continued. There's more. She opened another document. The transfer to Daniel was not a simple gift. What was it? Conditional. I frowned, meaning, if certain debts weren't repaid, ownership would shift. She looked at me. Your father. I didn't understand. Then why did Daniel get the shares? Because the agreement was modified. By whom? Rachel pointed to the bottom. Martin Cross, my father's attorney. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. What does that mean? It means someone changed the ownership structure after your mother's original agreement. Can they do that? Not without authorization? Whose authorization? Your mother's. I stared at the document. Then Rachel said something I wasn't prepared to hear. Emily, I don't think your mother signed this voluntarily. I looked up. What are you saying? I'm saying we need to investigate whether her signature was obtained under improper circumstances. I thought about Carol. My mother, the medication. Daniel, my father, the papers, and suddenly, every memory of those final weeks looked different. I whispered, can we prove it? Rachel didn't answer immediately. We can try. Then she opened one final file. There is one more thing. What? She placed a copy of a bank transfer on the desk. The date was 6 days before my mother died. The amount was $1.2 million. The recipient, Daniel Hale. The sender, my mother. I stared at the page. That's impossible. Rachel nodded. That's what I thought. She couldn't have made this transfer. Why? She was in hospice. Rachel looked at me. Exactly. I felt the room closing around me. Who authorized it? We don't know. And where did the money go? Rachel slid another page toward me. That's what we need to find out. I looked at the destination account. It belonged to D&H Development, Daniel's company. The same company receiving money from Hale Construction. The same company buying property with my father's guarantees. The same company my father told me not to investigate. I finally understood. The money wasn't disappearing. It was being moved. And someone had built an entire system to make sure nobody noticed. For the first time in 15 years, I considered confronting my father. Not because I wanted an apology, because I wanted to know whether he knew. That question haunted me. Was my father part of it, or was Daniel using him? Because if my father knew, then my entire childhood had been built on a lie. But if he didn't know, then my father was protecting the person who had been stealing from him. Either way, something had to happen. I went home. I opened the drawer where I kept my mother's things. Her wedding ring, a photograph, a scarf, and the small handwritten recipe book she had used for 28 years. I turned the pages, and between 2 recipes I found something. A folded piece of paper. I didn't remember seeing it before. I opened it. 3 sentences. My mother's handwriting. Emily, if you're reading this, I didn't get the chance to tell you everything. My hands began to shake. I kept reading. Trust the records, not the people. And beneath that, when the time comes, look inside your father's old blue toolbox. I stopped. The old blue toolbox. It had belonged to my grandfather. My father kept it in the garage. I had seen it 1,000 times. But I'd never opened it. I drove to my father's house that evening. He wasn't home. Daniel wasn't there either. I walked into the garage. The toolbox was exactly where it had always been, blue. Rust along the edges, one broken latch. I opened it. Inside were old wrenches, screwdrivers, a measuring tape. And beneath everything, a sealed envelope. My mother's handwriting was on the front, my name, Emily. I froze. There was another line beneath it. Do not give this to your father until you know the whole truth. I held the envelope. My heart was pounding. I almost opened it. But then I heard a car pull into the driveway. I quickly put it back, closed the toolbox, and stepped into the darkness of the garage. Daniel walked inside. He was talking on his phone. I couldn't hear everything. But I heard enough. She doesn't know yet. Pause. Then, no. Dad thinks she's just suspicious. Another pause. Daniel lowered his voice. Once the transfer is finished, none of this matters. My blood went cold. I stood completely still. Daniel continued. She can't stop it. Then he said the words that changed my entire understanding of the situation. Because Dad signed everything. I covered my mouth with my hand. Daniel ended the call. He walked past the toolbox, past me. He never saw me. And I realized something terrifying. My father wasn't just being manipulated. He had already signed something. Something that could change the ownership of everything. Including the family home. Including Hale Construction. Including the inheritance my mother had tried to protect. And perhaps including my future. That night, I went back to my apartment and opened the envelope I'd found in the toolbox. Inside was a single page. My mother's handwriting covered it. The first line made me stop breathing. Emily, if your father ever humiliates you in front of the family, don't defend yourself. I read it again. Then again. Why would my mother write that? How could she possibly know? I kept reading. Let him believe he has won. My hands trembled. Then came the sentence that would eventually explain why I brought an envelope to my Father's Day table. Because when the time comes, the truth will be worth more than anything you could say. I turned the page. There was one final sentence. And when your father finally discovers what Daniel has done, he will need to know that you were the only person who never betrayed him. I stared at the words. Then I heard my phone ring. It was Rachel. I answered. Emily, home, don't go anywhere. My stomach tightened. Why? We found something? What? Her voice was quiet. We traced the 1.2 million transfer. And it didn't go to Daniel. I sat up. The account was only a middle account. Then where did the money go? Rachel paused. Emily, where? The final recipient was a private trust. I waited. Whose trust? Rachel said the name. And my entire world changed. Because the trust wasn't Daniel's. It wasn't my father's. It wasn't my mother's. It belonged to someone I had never suspected. Someone who had been standing at my father's side for years. Someone who had been at the Father's Day barbecue. Someone who had laughed when my father called me a disgrace. And suddenly, I understood why my mother had told me not to defend myself. She knew the truth would eventually defend me. I just had to survive long enough to let it speak. Rachel's words stayed in my head all night. The money didn't go to Daniel. It went somewhere else. A private trust. And the name attached to that trust belonged to someone who had been standing in my father's circle for years. Someone who had watched me get humiliated. Someone who had watched my mother die. Someone who had smiled while my father called me a disgrace. I barely slept. At 6 the next morning, I was already sitting in Rachel's office. She had 3 folders spread across the conference table. Coffee sat untouched beside her. She looked exhausted. You were right, she said. You about what? This isn't just about Daniel. I sat down. Then what is it about? Rachel opened the first folder. The trust receiving the money is called the Hale Family Preservation Trust. I stared at the name. That sounds like something my father created. It does. Did he? No. She pushed a document toward me. The trust was established 11 years ago. I looked at the date. 11 years. That was long before my mother became sick. Long before the first transfer I discovered. Long before I had any reason to suspect anything. Who created it? Rachel looked at me. Your Aunt Margaret. My stomach dropped. Aunt Margaret. She nodded. Margaret Hale. I leaned back. My father's sister. The same woman who had sat at the Father's Day table. The same woman who had laughed when Dad called me selfish. The same woman who had spent years telling relatives that I was difficult. The same woman who had once told me, after my mother's funeral, that some daughters were simply born without gratitude. No, I whispered. Rachel didn't respond. I looked back at the document. Why would she create a trust for our family? That's what we're trying to determine. What does she own? Rachel opened another folder. That's where this gets interesting. She showed me a list of assets. Property, investment accounts, shares. Several businesses. And one name appeared repeatedly. Hale Construction. I stared. How much? Rachel calculated something on her calculator. At the time the trust was established, your aunt controlled approximately 12% of the company. I looked at her. How? I remembered. My grandfather had been Margaret's father too. Before he died, he had divided his shares between his children. My father received the majority. Margaret received a smaller portion, but she had never been involved in the company. At least that's what I believed. Why did nobody tell me? Rachel gave me a tired smile. Because you weren't supposed to know. The words chilled me. What does the trust do? Officially? She opened the document. It exists to preserve family assets for future generations. That sounds harmless. Would be. She looked at me. If the money had actually stayed there. My heartbeat increased. What happened? Rachel turned another page. From my mother. Yes. From Daniel. Yes. My father's company? Yes. And then. Most of it disappeared. I stared at her. That's what we're trying to trace. She pulled out a spreadsheet. Hundreds of transactions. Small amounts. Large amounts. Transfers between companies. Payments to lawyers, property purchases, consulting fees, loans, repayments. It was deliberately complicated. I knew that immediately. Someone had built a maze, not to hide one transaction, to hide a system. I pointed at one column. What's this? Rachel leaned closer. Those are payments to a company called Northbridge Advisory. Who owns it? She paused. That's the problem. Why? The ownership is buried behind another trust. I laughed quietly. Not because anything was funny. Because the whole thing had become absurd. How many trusts are there? 4. I stared at her. 4. That we know about. I rubbed my forehead. Who does this? People who don't want anyone following the money. For the next 3 days, Rachel and I worked through everything. We discovered that D&H development had been used as a funnel. Money went into Daniel's company. Daniel moved it into other entities. Those entities transferred portions into the Hale Family Preservation Trust. Then the trust sent money to Northbridge Advisory. And Northbridge purchased property. But the property wasn't registered to Daniel, or my father, or my aunt. It was registered to a separate holding company. Hale Legacy Properties. I recognized the name. It was the company my father had mentioned casually years earlier. I had assumed it was part of the construction business. It wasn't. It was separate. And according to the documents, my Aunt Margaret controlled it. I stared at the ownership records. She owns the property. Yes. How much? Rachel handed me the list. I read it. 14 commercial properties, 2 warehouses, 3 apartment buildings, a piece of land outside town, and the building where Hale Construction's main office stood. I looked up. Wait. Rachel nodded. Your father doesn't own the building. I couldn't speak. For 30 years. My father had told everyone he owned the company. He didn't. Not completely. My aunt controlled the real estate underneath it. And if the company stopped paying rent, she could force it out. Why would Dad agree to that? Maybe he didn't know. But he signed the agreements. People sign things they don't understand all the time. I remembered Daniel's words. Dad signed everything. Suddenly they made sense. My father wasn't necessarily the mastermind. He was the signature. Daniel was the messenger. And Aunt Margaret might be the person controlling the entire board. But there was still one question. Why destroy her own family's company? Why take money from her brother? Why transfer my mother's shares? Why hide everything? Rachel didn't know. Neither did I. Then we found the property sale. And everything changed. One of the properties owned by Hale Legacy Properties had been sold 8 months earlier. A warehouse. The sale price was $2.8 million. The buyer was a company registered outside the state. That company was owned by another corporation. And that corporation was owned by Daniel. I stared at the record. So Daniel bought a property from my aunt. Yes. With whose money? Rachel looked at me. We're still tracing it. How much did he pay? $2.8 million. Market value, about 5.4. I sat back. Half price approximately. Why would my aunt sell him a property worth $5 million for less than 3? Rachel didn't answer. I already knew. Because the difference was part of the transfer. The money wasn't being stolen in one obvious transaction. It was being moved through fake sales, inflated loans, discounted properties, consulting fees, and shell companies. And the people involved all benefited, everyone except my father, and my mother, and me. I drove to my father's office that afternoon. This time I didn't knock, I walked straight in. My father looked up. Emily. I placed a folder on his desk. He stared at it. What is that? Your company. He didn't touch it. I told you to stay out of this. I know. Then why are you here? Because someone is stealing from you. His expression changed. Woo. I looked him directly in the eyes. Your family? He stood. You need to leave. Did you know Aunt Margaret owns the building this company operates from? His face went still. What, did you know? Did you know she controls the Hale Family Preservation Trust? He stared at me. What are you talking about? Did you know Daniel has been moving company money into it? My father's voice dropped. Stop. Did you know Mom's shares were transferred to Daniel? Emily? Did you know she didn't want to sign them? Enough. He slammed his hand on the desk. I didn't move. For the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of his anger. Where did you get these documents? Public records. He stared at me, then something happened. His shoulders dropped. Just slightly. He looked older, much older. How much? What? How much money? I understood. He wasn't asking me how much I had found. He was asking how much he had lost. I don't know yet. He sat down. I remained standing. After a long silence, he said, Daniel told me the company was fine. I know. He said the transfers were investments. Some were. He looked up. Some. Most weren't. My father closed his eyes. I could see the humiliation beginning. Not the kind he had inflicted on me. The kind that comes when you realize someone you trusted has been lying to you. Why would he do this? I don't know. My father looked at me. Do you think I knew? That question surprised me. No. He looked away. Your mother always said I trusted people too easily. I swallowed. She was right. He nodded slowly. Then he whispered. She knew. It wasn't a question. I looked at him. Yes. His eyes filled. How much did she know? I don't know. He looked at the folder. Did she leave you something? I froze. Why would you ask that? He didn't answer. Instead, he said, Your mother was frightened near the end. I know. She kept asking me about you. My heart tightened. What did she say? He shook his head. I don't remember. You remember? He looked at me. I remember her telling me that I'd regret choosing Daniel. I didn't expect that. What did you say? I told her she was sick. The words came out quietly. He looked ashamed. She wasn't wrong. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then he asked, Does Daniel know you found this? I didn't answer. He understood. Emily, what? Be careful. I almost smiled. After 15 years of telling me I didn't belong, my father was warning me. Why? Because if Daniel is involved. He stopped. What? My father looked toward the door. Then lowered his voice. He's not the only one. I stared at him. What does that mean? Before he could answer, the office door opened. Daniel walked in. He stopped when he saw me. Then he looked at my father. Then the folder. His expression changed, just for a second. But I saw it. Fear. The same fear I had seen in my father's eyes on Father's Day. Daniel recovered quickly. What are you doing here? I smiled. Talking to Dad. About? Family? He looked at my father. What did she tell you? My father didn't answer. Daniel stepped closer. She's been digging into the company. My father looked at him. Is that true? Daniel didn't answer immediately. That hesitation told us more than words could. Daniel? He sighed. She doesn't understand what she's looking at. My father stood. Daniel's face hardened. Not here? Why not? Because she's twisting things? I looked at him. Then explain the 1.2 million. He froze. My father turned toward him. What 1.2 million? Daniel looked at me. I watched the mask fall. Only for a moment. Then it came back. You don't know what you're talking about. Mom's money. My father's face went pale. Daniel? Daniel looked at him. She gave it to me? Why? She wanted me to have it. Why didn't she tell me? Daniel shrugged. She didn't want you to interfere. My father stared at him. Then he whispered, Your mother hated lying? Daniel said nothing. I picked up my folder. I'm leaving. My father looked at me. Emily. I stopped. Thank you. I turned. He looked uncomfortable saying it. Almost like the words physically hurt him. Don't thank me yet. Then I walked out. That night, my father called me. I almost didn't answer. When I did, he said, Your mother left something in the safe. What safe? The old one. What are you talking about? She told me if anything happened, I was supposed to give it to you. My heart started pounding. We're in my bedroom?
Is it locked? Yes.
Do you have the combination? No. Then how am I supposed to open it? He was silent. Then he said, Your birthday. I froze. My father had never remembered my birthday without being reminded. Why? Your mother chose it. I drove to his house. He waited in the hallway. We walked into his bedroom. The safe was hidden behind an old painting. He moved it. There it was. Black steel. Small old. He stepped aside. I entered my birthday. The lock clicked. Inside were documents. A jewelry box. 2 passport, a photograph, and another envelope. This one was brown. My name was written across it. My father's hand started shaking. She left that for you. I took it. Did you read it? No. Why? Because she told me not to. I looked at him. For the first time, I believed him. I opened the envelope. Inside was a letter. I unfolded it. The handwriting was unmistakably my mother's. My darling Emily. I stopped. My eyes filled. I continued. If you're reading this, then the family has reached the point I feared. I looked at my father. He stepped away. I read silently. Your father will believe Daniel. He always has. Not because Daniel is better, but because your father needs to believe the son he chose was worth choosing. My father turned away. I kept reading. But there is something you must understand. Daniel did not begin this alone. My heart stopped. The person behind him has been waiting for years. I looked at my father. He was staring out the window. I read the next line. Do not trust Margaret. My breath caught. I looked at my father. Aunt Margaret. He turned. What? I showed him the page. His face changed. My mother continued. She knows what happened to the shares. She knows what happened to the money. And she knows why your father has been kept in the dark. My father sat down. Margaret. I kept reading. But there is one thing neither of them knows. I turned the page. And there it was. The secret that had been hidden for 15 years. The reason my mother had trusted me. The reason she had told me to collect records. The reason she had left instructions. The reason she had known my father would eventually humiliate me. I read the final paragraph. Then I stopped. My father speak. What does it say? I folded the letter. He stepped closer. Emily. I looked at him. I can't tell you yet. Why? Because Mom told me not to. His face fell. Then he said something I had never heard him say. Please. Not an order. Not a command, a plea. I almost gave in. But the letter had one final instruction. At the bottom of the page, my mother had written, when the truth comes out, make sure everyone is there. I understood. She hadn't wanted a private confrontation. She wanted witnesses. She wanted the family to see. And suddenly I knew exactly what I had to do. Father's Day was 3 weeks away. For the next 3 weeks, I disappeared. At least from my family's perspective. I stopped answering Daniel. I stopped visiting my father. I stopped attending family dinners. I didn't tell anyone what I knew. Instead, I worked. Rachel helped me trace the remaining transactions. We discovered more than I could have imagined. The construction company had been losing money for years. Daniel had been borrowing against company assets. Margaret had been acquiring those assets through separate entities. My mother's shares had been transferred under questionable circumstances. And my father's signatures had been used to authorize transactions he didn't understand. But then we discovered the most important document. A private agreement dated 14 years earlier. 1 year before my mother's death. It contained a clause that changed everything. The clause said that if Hale Construction ever faced insolvency because of mismanagement by one family member, control of the company's voting shares would transfer to the person designated by the original founder. The designated person wasn't Daniel. It wasn't my father. It wasn't Margaret, it was me. I stared at the document. Why? Rachel smiled sadly. Because your grandfather knew you. I shook my head. My grandfather died when I was 20. He knew your father favored Daniel. How? Because he wrote a letter. She handed it to me. I opened it. My grandfather's handwriting was shaky. Emily, your father thinks leadership belongs to the person who speaks the loudest. One day he'll learn that leadership belongs to the person who can be trusted when nobody is watching. I couldn't breathe. Then I read the final paragraph. If the family ever loses its way, you are the one I want holding the keys. I looked at Rachel. No. Does Daniel? No. Does Margaret? Probably. I stared at the document. Suddenly everything made sense. Margaret had been trying to gain control before this clause could be activated. Daniel had been helping her. My father had been manipulated into signing documents. And my mother had discovered the plan. She had tried to stop them. But she was too sick. So she left the truth for me. And now I had the one thing none of them knew existed. Control. Not because I wanted it. Because my grandfather had chosen me to protect the family when everyone else failed. I could have taken everything. I could have destroyed Daniel. I could have exposed Margaret. I could have walked into my father's office and demanded the company. But I didn't, because my mother had taught me something different. Power isn't proved by what you take. It's proved by what you refuse to take. So I made a decision. I would not expose them privately. I would not threaten them. I would not scream. I would not beg my father to believe me. I would wait. I would let my father say exactly what he wanted to say. In front of everyone. And then, I would give him the envelope. 3 days before Father's Day, Daniel called me. Emily, his voice was unusually calm. What? Dad wants you at Father's Day. I almost laughed. Yes, why? He thinks we should put the past behind us. I looked at the folder on my desk. That's interesting. What? Nothing. He paused. Are you coming? Yes. Good. Then he said something strange. Don't bring anything. I frowned. What? Just come as family. I stared at the phone. Why would you say that? Because Dad doesn't want drama. I smiled. Neither do I. He hung up. I sat there for a long time. Then I opened the drawer. Inside was a plain envelope. I placed the first document inside. Then the second. Then the third. Then the letter from my mother. I stopped. I almost put it in, but I didn't. That letter wasn't for everyone. It was for my father. So I made a separate copy. The original stayed with me. The copy went into the envelope. I sealed it. Then I wrote 4 words on the front, for Father's Day. Nothing else. No accusation, no threat, no explanation. Just 4 words, because by then, I knew something. My father was going to humiliate me. Daniel was going to smile. Margaret was going to sit quietly. And everyone was going to believe their version of the story, until the envelope opened. Father's Day arrived. I drove to my father's house that morning. I sat in the car for almost 10 minutes before getting out. The house looked exactly the same, white siding, green shutters. The oak tree my mother had planted. The old wooden swing. The driveway where Daniel had learned to ride a bicycle. For a moment I was 12 again. I wanted my mother. Then I remembered her final instruction. When the truth comes out, make sure everyone is there. I walked toward the backyard. People were already laughing. Daniel was standing beside my father. Margaret was sitting at the table. My father saw me. His expression changed, not warmly, not happily. He looked almost annoyed. Then Daniel leaned toward him, whispered something. My father nodded. I knew immediately. They had planned something. I just didn't know what. I walked toward the table. My father lifted his glass. Emily. Everyone turned. And then he smiled, that smile, the one I had seen thousands of times. The smile that meant he was about to make me small. He stood. People quieted. I looked at him. He raised his glass. And began. I'd like to say something about family. I felt the envelope inside my bag. My mother's letter. My grandfather's agreement, the financial records, the proof. Everything. I took one breath. My father looked at Daniel, then at me, and said the words that would trigger everything. I have 2 children. He paused. But only one ever acted like a son. The laughter started. And this time, I didn't feel hurt. Because I knew something they didn't. In less than 10 minutes, my father was going to discover that the daughter he had spent 15 years humiliating was the only reason he still had a company to inherit, and the man he was about to praise had already helped someone else take it from him. I have 2 children. My father's voice carried across the backyard. He paused. Then he looked at Daniel. But only one ever acted like a son. The laughter came almost immediately. Not from everyone, but enough. My Aunt Margaret smiled into her glass. Daniel looked down, pretending to be embarrassed. My father continued. Daniel has always been there for me. I stood beside the patio table, quiet. Still. My hand rested against the side of my purse. The envelope was inside. My father looked at me. And then there's Emily. The laughter stopped. Everyone knew what was coming. My father took a slow sip from his glass. Emily has always had her own ideas. A few people chuckled. She's independent. He said the word as if it were an insult. She doesn't need anyone. Another pause. Especially her father. I looked around. My cousin Sarah was staring at the ground. My Aunt Margaret was watching me carefully. Daniel looked confident. Almost too confident. And suddenly I realized something. They weren't simply enjoying my father's speech. They were waiting for something. This had been planned. My father wasn't improvising. Daniel had told him what to say. Margaret had probably helped. They wanted me embarrassed. They wanted me angry. They wanted me to react. Because an angry daughter is easy to dismiss. An emotional daughter is easy to discredit. A crying daughter can be called unstable. But a calm daughter holding documents was dangerous. So I remained silent. My father looked disappointed. He had expected me to interrupt. I think. He continued. Some people need to remember who was there for them when they had nothing. I almost smiled. Because that sentence had been waiting for me my entire life. Who was there for you? Who paid for you? Who fed you? Who gave you a roof? Who raised you? My father had used those questions like chains, and I had spent years answering them. Today I didn't. He continued. I sacrificed for both my children. Daniel nodded. My father placed his hand on Daniel's shoulder, but only Daniel understood the value of sacrifice. My Aunt Margaret finally spoke. That's true. My father smiled. Thank you, Margaret. She lifted her glass. Family should stick together. I looked at her. She held my gaze for a moment, then smiled. There was something cold behind that smile. She knew. Not everything. But enough. She knew there was something coming. My father turned toward me. Emily, do you want to say anything? 43 people looked at me. The old me would have panicked. I would have explained. I would have defended every accusation. I would have listed every sacrifice I had made. I would have told them how many nights I had worked. How many bills I had paid. How many times I had helped my parents without telling anyone. But my mother's letter was in my purse, and her words were in my mind. Let him believe he has won. So I smiled. No. My father frowned. No, I don't have anything to say. A few people exchanged confused looks. My father almost looked irritated. Nothing, nothing. He sat down. Fine. Daniel leaned back. He thought he had won. That was when I stepped forward. I reached into my purse. The room changed. My aunt stopped smiling. Daniel sat upright. My father looked at my hand. I pulled out the envelope and placed it beside his plate. The same envelope I had prepared weeks earlier. The same envelope my mother had unknowingly been waiting for. My father stared at it. What is that? Your Father's Day gift. He laughed. Not a happy laugh. A nervous one. I don't need anything. I know. I pushed it toward him. But you need this. The backyard became completely silent. Daniel looked at Margaret. Margaret looked at my father. My father picked up the envelope. He turned it over. He felt the thickness. What did you put in here? The truth. His smile disappeared. Emily. I took a step back. Open it. He looked at me. Then at everyone else. He slowly tore the envelope open. The first thing he pulled out was a document. He looked at it. His face changed. What is this? I didn't answer. He read the first page. His eyes moved across the numbers. Then stopped. Where did you get this? I remained silent. Daniel stood. Dad, don't. My father looked at him. What is this? Daniel froze. I watched the confidence leave his face. The document was the financial transfer summary, the transfers from Hale Construction, the payments to D&H Development, the dates, the amounts, the account numbers, the signatures, everything. My father looked at Daniel. You told me these were investments. Daniel swallowed. They were. My father held up the paper. $186,000. Daniel said nothing. $214,000. Silence. $75,000. My father's voice became louder. Daniel looked at me. You've been digging through my private accounts. No. I answered calmly. These are company records. My father looked at him again. Answer me. Daniel's face tightened. They were business expenses. To your private company? I was building something. With my money. Daniel stepped forward. Your money. My father stared at him. My company. Daniel laughed nervously. No, Dad. Our company. My father went completely still. What did you say? Daniel realized his mistake. I could see it. He had revealed too much. My father looked at me. Then back at Daniel. Explain. Daniel opened his mouth. Nothing came out. My Aunt Margaret finally stood. Richard. This isn't the place. My father turned toward her. What do you know? She froze. About what? About this. He held up the document. Margaret smiled nervously. Emily has always been suspicious. I almost laughed. That's not an answer. My father looked at me. Then what is it? I reached into the envelope again. There's more. I handed him another document. He opened it. His eyes widened. This one showed the ownership structure of Hale Legacy Properties, the company that controlled the buildings, the warehouses, the land, and the building Hale Construction operated from. My father read the name. Then looked at Margaret. Why do you own this? Margaret's face went pale. I don't know what you're talking about. You signed it. My father held up the page. You transferred these properties. I invested in them. With whose money? Margaret looked at Daniel. Daniel looked away. My father slowly turned back toward me. Emily. I said nothing. He flipped through the documents. Then found the property valuation. His voice dropped. 5.4 million. He looked at the sale record. Sold for 2.8. He looked at Daniel. You bought this. Daniel didn't answer. You bought my building. Dad, you bought my building from your aunt. It's complicated. My father slammed the paper on the table. Then uncomplicate it. Everyone jumped. Children stopped playing. The music had already been turned off. Nobody was laughing anymore. My father pointed toward Daniel. Daniel looked terrified. 5. 4. Dad? 3. Daniel turned toward Margaret. She told me it was temporary. My father's face changed. Ooh, Daniel, Margaret. Margaret stared at him. You little. 2. Daniel stepped backward. She said we needed to move the assets before the bank found out. My father's face became blank. 1. Silence. Then my father whispered, What bank? Nobody answered. I reached into the envelope again. The third document. I handed it to him. He unfolded it. His hands began to shake. It was the loan agreement, the guarantee, his signature, his company's assets listed as collateral. My father stared at the signature. I never approved this. I looked at him. You signed it. I didn't understand what it was. I know. He looked at me. For the first time he seemed genuinely confused. Then why did you put it in the envelope? Because you needed to know. He looked at Daniel. Did you know? Daniel didn't answer. My father shouted. Did you know? Daniel finally whispered. Yes. The word seemed to break something inside my father. He sat down, his hands went to his face. My Aunt Margaret began crying, not from regret, from fear. She knew the next documents were coming, and they were worse. My father slowly opened the next page. It was the transfer of my mother's shares, 30%, $7 million. Transferred to Daniel. My father stared. Then looked at Margaret. Why did you do this? Margaret shook her head. I didn't. You signed the agreement. No. It's your signature. I was pressured. By whom? Margaret looked at Daniel. Daniel looked at my father, then at me. Nobody spoke. I finally said Mom never wanted the shares transferred. My father's head lifted. What? She refused. How do you know? She told someone? Ooh, the hospice nurse. My father's face drained of color. He looked at me. Your mother told you. Then how? She left records. He stared at me. Records. I nodded. She knew something was wrong. My father looked down. His hands were trembling. I didn't know. I know. He looked at me. I swear I didn't know. I believed him. That was the strange part. After everything he'd done to me, I believed him. Because I had finally seen the difference between cruelty and weakness. My father had been cruel, but he had also been manipulated. He had trusted the wrong people. And he had spent years protecting Daniel, because admitting he was wrong would mean admitting that I had been right. My father turned toward Daniel. Did your mother know? Daniel's voice was barely audible. Did she know about the transfers? She found out. My father closed his eyes. How long? Daniel didn't answer. How long have you been doing this? Daniel finally said, about 6 years. My father looked as if someone had punched him. 6 years. Daniel nodded. 6 years. My father laughed. It was a broken sound. 6 years. He looked around the backyard. All this time. Then he looked at me. And I blamed her. Nobody spoke. He lowered his head. I blamed you? I said nothing. He looked at me again. I called you selfish. Silence. I told everyone you abandoned us. Silence. I said you didn't care about this family. My throat tightened. He looked at the documents. And you were the one trying to protect me. I finally answered. Yes. He looked away. Then my Aunt Margaret did something unexpected. She walked toward me. Everyone watched. She stopped a few feet away. You don't understand. I stared at her. Then explain. She looked at my father. I was trying to protect the company. My father laughed bitterly. By stealing it? I was trying to save it from him. She pointed at Daniel. Daniel stared at her. You told me to do it. I told you to protect the assets. You told me Dad would never understand. I didn't tell you to steal. You knew. Margaret's face collapsed. I knew the company was in trouble. My father stood. Why didn't you tell me? Because you wouldn't listen? I was your brother. You were blind. That sentence hit everyone. My father stared at her. Margaret began crying. Richard, you loved Daniel too much, my father whispered, and you hated Emily too much. Margaret didn't answer. I looked at her. Why? She stared at me. Why did you hate me? She wiped her face. I didn't. You did. She looked away. Your mother knew. Knew what? Margaret remained silent. My father looked at her. Margaret? She shook her head. I can't. You will? I stepped closer. Tell me. Margaret's voice broke. Your grandfather changed his will. I froze. What? She looked at me. Your grandfather didn't trust Daniel. My father looked shocked. What does that have to do with Emily? Margaret said, everything. She took a breath. Your grandfather had planned to give Emily control. My father looked at me. I nodded. He wanted her to inherit them. My father shook his head. No. Yes. When? Before he died. My father stared at me. Why didn't you tell me? Margaret looked at him. Because I wanted Daniel to have it. Silence. My father whispered. You destroyed the company. For my son. She looked at Daniel. He deserved it. Daniel stared at her. Mom. She looked at him. I did everything for you. Daniel shook his head. I didn't ask you to. That sentence broke her. She sat down. My father remained standing, and I realized something. The family war hadn't started with money. It had started with favoritism. Years of choosing one child over another. Years of telling Daniel he was destined for greatness. Years of telling me I wasn't enough. Money had simply given that favoritism a weapon. My father picked up the final document. I had saved it for last. The one document that could not be explained away. The one document that changed ownership. He unfolded it. Read the first paragraph. Then the second. Then stopped. His lips parted. What is this? I said. Read it. He looked at the signature. Then the name. Then the clause. His eyes filled with tears. Your grandfather. I nodded. He read it again. This says. He couldn't finish, I answered. That if the company is endangered by family mismanagement, Voting control transfers to the designated successor, who he already knew. He looked at me. I didn't answer. He whispered,
Emily? I nodded.
My father sat down. He covered his face. I could hear him breathing slowly. He looked up. You knew? Yes. How long? 3 weeks. And you still came here? Yes. Why? I looked at him. Because I didn't want to take the company from you. He stared. Then what do you want? That was the question. The question I had wanted him to ask for 15 years. I could have said money. I could have said an apology. I could have said control. Instead, I said, I wanted you to know the truth. My father nodded slowly. And the envelope. I looked at it. There is one thing left. His face tightened. What? I reached inside, pulled out my mother's letter, and placed it in his hands. This is from Mom. He stared at the handwriting. His entire body seemed to freeze. No. She wrote it before she died. He couldn't open it. His fingers trembled. Emily read it. He unfolded the letter. His eyes moved across the first lines. Then he stopped. His lips began to shake. I watched him read. I didn't need to hear the words. I already knew them. My darling Emily. If you're reading this, then the family has reached the point I feared. Your father will believe Daniel. Do not blame him for everything. My father's eyes filled. He continued. He has always needed to believe that the child he favored deserved the faith he placed in him. A tear fell onto the paper. He kept reading. But one day, he will discover the truth. My father covered his mouth. Then came the sentence that broke him. When that day comes, please remember that your father loved you even when he didn't know how to show it. He stopped. He looked at me. I looked away. He continued reading. He was wrong. He was unfair. He hurt you. But don't let his mistakes turn you into someone who needs revenge to feel whole. My father began crying, not quietly, not with dignity. He cried the way people cry when they realize they have spent years fighting the wrong enemy. He read the final lines. If you ever have the chance to destroy everything, don't. Save what can be saved. And if your father ever opens an envelope from you on Father's Day, I hope he finally understands that the daughter he underestimated was the person who loved him enough to tell him the truth. My father's hands dropped. The letter fell onto the table. Nobody moved. Then he stood. He walked toward me. For a second, I thought he might hug me. He didn't. He stopped in front of me. His voice broke. I'm sorry. 2 words. 2 words I had waited 15 years to hear. But they didn't fix everything. They couldn't. So I simply nodded. Thank you. He looked at me. Is that all? No. He swallowed. What else? I need you to understand something? Anything. I'm not taking the company. He stared. What? I'm not taking your company? But the agreement? I'll use the authority if I have to. Why? To protect it. He looked confused. I don't understand. I don't want to own your life, Dad. I paused. I just don't want anyone else stealing it. My father closed his eyes. Then he nodded. I understand. But the story wasn't over. Because Daniel wasn't crying, he wasn't apologizing, he was standing near the table, staring at the documents. And I knew why. He had just discovered something even he hadn't known. The company wasn't his. The properties weren't his. The money wasn't his. And the sister he had spent years dismissing now had the legal authority to stop him. He looked at me. Nook. You knew. Yes. You waited. Yes. He shook his head. You could destroy me. I looked at him. I'm not going to destroy you. His expression changed. Then what? You are going to return what you took. He laughed bitterly. I don't have it? Then you'll help us find it. And if I don't? I looked toward Rachel, who had been standing near the gate. She stepped forward. Daniel's face went pale. He hadn't noticed her. She placed a folder on the table. We have enough evidence to begin civil proceedings. Daniel looked at my father. Dead. My father didn't look at him. Daniel. His voice was exhausted. You need to tell the truth. Daniel shook his head. No. My father finally looked up. Tell the truth. I can't. Why? Daniel looked toward Margaret. She was crying. Then he looked at me. And finally he whispered. Because if I tell you everything. He stopped. My father waited. Daniel swallowed. You'll realize I'm not the person who started this. The backyard became silent again. I looked at him. What do you mean? Daniel looked at my father. Then at Margaret. Then back at me. There is someone else. My father frowned. Who? Daniel shook his head. I can't say. Why? Because she's the reason Mom died afraid. My blood turned cold. My father's face went white. What did you just say? Daniel looked at me, and for the first time that afternoon, he looked genuinely terrified. Emily, what? He whispered. Your mother wasn't afraid of Margaret. I stared at him. Then who was she afraid of? Daniel looked toward the house, and said one name. A name I had never expected. A name that made my father's face collapse. Because the person Daniel had just named was standing only 20 feet away, and she had been listening to everything. The woman stepped forward. Everyone turned, and I realized the final secret inside my mother's story had been sitting at my father's Father's Day table all along. The woman stepped forward. Everyone turned toward her, and for several seconds nobody spoke. It was my father's longtime attorney, Martin Cross, the same man who had witnessed my mother's signature, the same man whose name appeared on the transfer of her shares, the same man who had advised my father for more than 20 years, and the same man who had been sitting quietly at the Father's Day table, watching everything unfold. I looked at him. He didn't look surprised. He looked defeated. My father stared at him. Martin. Martin lowered his head. Daniel stood frozen. My Aunt Margaret whispered, "You said you wouldn't tell." Martin looked at her. "I didn't." My father turned toward Margaret. "You knew." Margaret's face collapsed. "I knew he was involved." My father looked at Martin. "How long?" Martin didn't answer. My father stepped toward him. "How long?" 15 years. The words landed like a bomb. 15 years. I felt my stomach turn. My mother had been dead for 15 years. 15 years ago, my family had started falling apart, and Martin had been there. My father stared at him. "What did you do?" Martin took a deep breath. "Hose." He looked at Margaret, then at Daniel, then finally at me. "Your mother's." I froze. "What?" Martin looked directly at me. "Your mother asked me to protect something." My father shook his head. "You're lying." "I'm not." "Then explain." Martin slowly walked toward the table. He placed his briefcase down, opened it, and removed a small black folder. "I was supposed to give this to Emily only after the family meeting." I stared at him. "Why?" "Because your mother knew you wouldn't believe me." I looked at the folder. "What is the original documents?" "Which documents?" "All of them." He opened the folder. "The original share agreement. The original trust documents. The original bank instructions. The original correspondence between my mother and Martin. And one handwritten note. My mother's handwriting." Again, I could barely breathe. Martin handed it to me. I unfolded it. There were only a few lines. "Martin, if they ever try to convince Emily that she is the problem, give her the originals. She deserves the truth, even if the truth destroys the family story we built." I looked at Martin. "What family story?" He didn't answer. My father did. "The story that I was a good father." I turned toward him. He looked broken. I wasn't. I shook my head. "Don't do this." "What?" "Don't turn this into something it isn't." He looked at me. "I spent 15 years believing you were the problem." His voice cracked. "Your mother knew I was wrong." He sat down. I just couldn't admit it. Martin opened another document. "This is the original agreement between your mother and your father." My father looked at it. "What agreement?" "The one concerning the company shares." He read it. His expression changed. "This says Emily was supposed to receive control." "Yes." "Why wasn't I told?" "Because your mother believed Daniel would try to interfere." My father looked at Daniel. Daniel stared at the ground. Martin continued. "Your mother suspected money was being moved." I looked at him. "Enough." "Did she know about Margaret?" "Less." Margaret started crying. She found out that Margaret was purchasing company properties through separate entities. My father looked at his sister. "You knew?" Margaret couldn't answer. Martin continued. "Your mother also discovered Daniel was receiving money from Hale Construction." Daniel finally spoke. "She didn't know everything." Martin looked at him. "She knew enough to be afraid." Daniel shook his head. "She threatened to expose us." My father's eyes widened. Daniel realized what he'd said. Martin answered for him. "Daniel and Margaret." My father closed his eyes. Then he asked, "What happened?" Martin hesitated. "Your wife wanted to confront both of them." "Then why didn't she?" "Because she was already sick." "Pond." Martin looked at me. "Because someone convinced her that if she went public, Emily would be dragged into the scandal." I frowned. "Who?" Martin looked at Margaret. Margaret began crying. "It wasn't me?" Martin shook his head. "No." He looked at Daniel. "Then who?" Martin took a breath. Danny, my brother, looked up. "No. You told your mother that if she exposed the transfers, Emily would be accused of helping." Daniel stared at him. "I was trying to scare her." My father stood. "You did what?" "I didn't think she'd believe me." My father walked toward him. "You threatened your mother." Daniel began crying. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen." My father stopped. "You made her afraid." "I was scared." "You made your dying mother afraid." "I was scared." Daniel shouted. The backyard fell silent. Then he whispered, "I thought if she exposed us, everything would collapse." My father looked at him. "And it did." I stood there watching my brother cry, and strangely, I didn't feel victorious. I had imagined this moment for years. I had imagined Daniel exposed, my father realizing the truth, Margaret losing everything. But standing there, watching my family collapse in front of me, I didn't feel powerful, I felt tired. Because revenge doesn't always feel like victory. Sometimes it feels like finally getting an answer to a question you wish you had never needed to ask. My father looked at me. Emily, I turned. I owe you more than an apology. I didn't answer. I owe you my entire life. Don't say that. Why? Because you still have a life, he looked at me. Then let me spend the rest of it making things right. I swallowed. Start with the truth. He nodded. I will. The police were not called that day. Not immediately. Rachel advised us to document everything first. The evidence was too extensive. There were financial records, corporate document transfers, false valuations, questionable signatures, potential breaches of fiduciary duty. It wasn't something we could solve with screaming. So the next morning, my father called an emergency meeting of the company board. This time, I was invited, not as his daughter, not as Daniel's sister, as the person named in my grandfather's succession agreement. When I walked into the conference room, everyone stood. I almost laughed. For 15 years, I had been told I didn't belong at that table. Now every chair was waiting for me. My father stood at the head. He looked around the room. Then he said, "Before we discuss the company's future, I owe someone an apology." Everyone looked at me, he continued. For years I allowed personal favoritism to influence my decisions. His voice shook. I trusted my son because he was my son. Daniel wasn't in the room. He had agreed to cooperate with the investigation. My father continued. And I punished my daughter because she refused to become someone she wasn't. I looked down. He took a breath. I was wrong. The room remained silent. Then he turned to me. Emily, I want you to take control. I shook my head. Not alone. What do you mean? We rebuild the company. He nodded. How? With independent oversight. Agreed. No family member controls financial transfers. Agreed. No private companies receiving company money. Agreed. Full audit. And the employees who had nothing to do with this don't lose their jobs. My father smiled through tears. Agreed. I looked around the table. And we create a scholarship in Mom's name. My father's eyes filled. For employees' children, he nodded. Yes. That was the moment I knew the company was going to survive. Not because I had taken it, because we had finally stopped pretending that family loyalty meant protecting people who were doing wrong. Months passed. The investigation uncovered more. The money was recovered piece by piece. Some properties were sold, some were returned. Some transactions became legal disputes. Margaret eventually resigned from every company position. Daniel cooperated with investigators and returned what he could. Their relationship with my father never fully recovered. Maybe it couldn't. Some bridges are not meant to be rebuilt exactly as they were. They are meant to teach you where not to walk again. Martin Cross retired from private practice after the investigation. Before he left, he gave me one final document. It was a letter from my mother. The original. I had never read it, he told me. She asked me to keep this until everything was settled. I opened it that night. There was only one page. My darling Emily, if you are reading this, then you survived the part I was most afraid of. I smiled through tears. I kept reading. I know your father has hurt you. I know Daniel has been favored. I know you have spent years wondering why being a good daughter was never enough. My eyes blurred. Please understand something. It was never because you weren't enough. I stopped. Those words were the ones I had needed since I was a child. You were simply standing in a family that had confused love with favoritism. I wiped my eyes. Your father believed giving Daniel everything would make him successful. He didn't understand that giving one child everything teaches him to expect everything. And giving another child nothing teaches her how to survive without anyone. I laughed softly. Because that was exactly what had happened. Then came the final paragraph. If you ever have the power to punish them, remember that punishment is easy. Building something better is harder. Choose the harder thing. I folded the letter and cried. Not because I was sad. Because for the first time, I felt understood. A year after Father's Day, my father invited me to dinner. Just the two of us. No Daniel, no Margaret, no relatives, no audience. We sat at the same table where I had once been humiliated. He placed something beside my plate, an envelope. I stared at it. What is this? Open it? I did. Inside was a photograph, my mother, my father, me, and Daniel. We were standing in front of the old family house. I was about 10. Daniel was 12. My mother was smiling. My father had his arm around both of us. On the back, my father had written something. The family I should have protected. I looked at him. He said, "I thought you deserved it." I nodded. Then he added, "I have one more thing." He pulled out a small box. Inside was my mother's wedding ring. I stared at it. "Why are you giving me this?" "Your mother wanted you to have it." "How do you know?" "She told me." "When?" "Before she died." I looked at the ring. My father continued, "She said you would know what to do with it." I slipped it onto my finger. It fit perfectly. My father smiled. Then he said, "Your mother was right about one thing." "What?" "You were always the strongest person in this family." I looked at him. "No." He frowned. I shook my head. "Then what were you?" I smiled. "I was just the person who refused to become cruel." My father looked down, then nodded. "That's better." Years later, people still asked me about Father's Day. Not because of the humiliation. Because of the envelope. Some people wanted to know what had been inside. Some thought it contained money. Others thought it contained a revenge letter. A few believed I had planned the entire scene to destroy my father. But the truth was simpler. The envelope contained documents, evidence, my mother's letter, and the truth. It wasn't designed to destroy my father. It was designed to wake him up, and it did. The strangest part. My father never again celebrated Father's Day with a huge family gathering. He said he didn't want another performance. Instead, every year, he invited only a few people, employees, old friends, family members who had learned to apologize, and me. The first Father's Day after everything was resolved, he stood beside me in the kitchen. He looked nervous. "Emily." "Yes." "Do you remember what I said that day?" I smiled. "Which part?" He sighed. "When I said Daniel was the only one who acted like a son." I nodded. He looked at me. "I was wrong." "I know." He laughed. "You could make this easier." "I've waited a long time to say that. I deserve it, probably." He smiled. Then he hugged me. Not the awkward half hug he had given me when I was a child. A real hug. The kind that lasts long enough to say everything words failed to say. When he pulled away, he looked at me. "Thank you for not giving up on me." I thought about my mother, my grandfather, the envelope, that Father's Day. The laughter. The humiliation, the silence. And the moment my father opened the envelope and realized the daughter he had publicly shamed was the person who had spent weeks protecting him. I said, "I didn't save you because you were my father." He looked confused. "Then why?" "Because I didn't want to become like the people who hurt me." He nodded slowly, and that was the truth. I used to think justice meant making people feel the pain they had caused. Now I know better. Justice is sometimes simply allowing the truth to stand in the room without protecting the lie. My father had humiliated me in front of everyone. He had made me feel small. He had praised the brother who betrayed him. He had laughed while other people laughed at me. But when he opened that envelope, he didn't discover that I was richer. He didn't discover that I was smarter. He didn't discover that I had planned revenge. He discovered something much more painful. He discovered that the daughter he had spent years underestimating had been the one person who never stopped caring. And maybe that's why he screamed. Not because the envelope contained something terrible, but because for the first time, he finally understood what he had almost lost: his daughter, his company, his wife's trust, and the family he had spent years trying to protect from the wrong. Today I still have that envelope. It's empty now. The documents are stored safely. The original letters are framed in my office. My mother's ring is on my finger. And my grandfather's agreement sits in a locked drawer. But I keep the envelope. Not because I want to remember the humiliation. I keep it because I want to remember what happened after it. The day I stopped trying to convince people that I was worthy. The day I stopped begging my father to see me. The day I learned that silence can be stronger than an argument. And the day the truth finally spoke for itself. Sometimes the person everyone laughs is the person holding the evidence. Sometimes the quietest person at the table knows the most. And sometimes the envelope someone opens expecting revenge contains nothing but the truth. My father once told everyone that I wasn't a real daughter. Years later, he told me something completely different. He said, "You were the daughter I didn't deserve." And I told him, "Maybe." Then I smiled. "But you still get to be my father." Because forgiveness doesn't mean pretending nothing happened. It means refusing to let what happened decide who you become. And that Father's Day when my father opened my envelope and screamed wasn't the day I lost my family. It was the day the lies finally did. And for the first time in 15 years, the truth won. If this story touched you, remember, sometimes the truth takes years to surface, but it always finds a way to be heard. You're watching The Family Conspiracy. If you enjoyed this story, like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss another unforgettable family secret. Until next time, stay curious, stay strong, and remember, the truth is always hiding somewhere.